Happy Saturday, everybody. Today was a little bit of a special day. Instead of a lesson, I decided to have a Q&A for those of you who had questions about the Bible. So I did get several questions in, which is very exciting. And I have them here. I'm not going to tell you who asked them. It's going to be private. But anyway, if you log on here and find that you have a question and we have time, I'll watch the clock, and if I have time, I will answer it here. Let me grab my Bible really quick, sorry. Okay, just in case. So, okay. The first question that someone sent me is, number one, the question is, did Adam and Eve have belly buttons? I love this question. A lot of people don't think about this question. And the answer is this. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. We know that as human beings, our navel or our belly button is a result of where as a baby we were inside of our mom's womb and we were attached to the inside of our mom by that umbilical cord and then attached to the baby, the belly button area. And when the baby is born, they clip the umbilical cord, and after a while it dries up and falls off, and we are left with the belly button. Okay, so did Adam and Eve have belly buttons? Well, Adam and Eve were never in a womb as babies, were they? God created Adam as a full-grown man out of the dust of the ground, and God created Eve from one of Adam's ribs as a full-grown woman. So either they didn't, and God, either they did because God created them with one so they wouldn't be freaked out when they had their own kids and saw that their kids had belly buttons, or they just didn't. My opinion, I have a tendency to believe that they did not. It would kind of be a special reminder to them that they were special creations by the Lord himself. And I don't know. So maybe one day we can, I don't know if it would be rude to ask when we got up there, if we could ask to see. We probably won't care when we get up there. Anyway, so that was the first question. Did Adam and Eve have belly buttons? That was the first question. Question number 2 is, let me read it here. The person asked, why do some Bibles use the word demons and some use the word devils in the same verse, some translations? That is a very, very good question, believe it or not. The translation of the word demon is, the actual translation is a word called daimone, and it actually means, that word daimone means intelligence. Okay, it doesn't mean evil spirit, it means intelligence. Back in the New Testament, especially, this term daimones would be used to describe a philosopher or one of the great thinkers of the time. So using this term wouldn't cause people any worry, okay? They wouldn't associate that with something bad. Something just flew in my mouth, I'm sorry. A piece of fuzz or something. Anyway, I'm trying not to die on camera. Anyway, so that's what the term was used for back then. That's why when talking about evil spirits, you should use the word devils, because back in that time, using the term demon wouldn't cause people any kind of worry or anything. They didn't associate the word demon with unclean spirit. They associated it with someone who was smart, a smart person. So that's why the translations that I prefer use the word devils instead of demons, evil spirits. So you should use the correct term. People understood when one of the writers of the books of the New Testament used the word devils. People understood what that meant. They knew they weren't talking about a smart philosophical thinker. They knew they were talking about evil spirits, devils. So that's why I prefer the term devils in my translations that I have here. Okay, question number 3. Why or what? The question is, what do church deacons do? I like this question. The New Testament addresses this, okay? The New Testament says that the apostles, like, Peter and John and James and them, they were getting complaints from church people because some of the widows and the needy people of the church were not getting their needs met. They complained that the apostles, all they were doing was like preaching and teaching and stuff, and they weren't actually going out into the community to minister to the physical needs of the people. They were feeding them spiritually, but they weren't meeting these widows' needs, widows who didn't have anybody. And so the widows were getting neglected. So that was a problem. So the disciples' perspective was this: it's not feasible or logical that we, the pastors of the churches, basically, take time away from preaching to the lost people to go and serve people who are needy. Now that sounds kind of cold and hard, but don't look at it that way, because those men were called to preach. They weren't called to feed people necessarily. So, but that doesn't mean that people's needs didn't need to be met. So what they did is, they didn't mean that they were too good to help people and serve. They were just busy. They were busy going about the Lord's work, about preaching the gospel. And so they realized that, yes, these people did have needs and they wanted to meet their needs. So what they would do is they would gather and they would decide on selecting some men in the church who could minister to people's physical needs. People had to be careful back then because the church was brand new. It was just starting, and they were facing a lot of persecution from the religious Jews of the time. So they had to be very, very careful about how they did their work and went about doing things, because they were being watched all the time. So they set apart men to help the needy in the church, and these men had to be honest. They had to have good reputations. They had to be godly. They had to be wise. Okay, so they were to help the widows and orphans especially. Widows and orphans especially. Guys, too many churches today, the deacons are just men who look important and sit around and make rules. It just seems that way. Our church, I'm proud to say, is not like that. Our deacons actually minister to people's needs. They check up on people, they go over there, they help, and that's what they're for. Okay, it's to ease the burden of the pastor. Doesn't mean the pastor doesn't love his people. It doesn't mean he's not aware of the needs and what's going on. It just frees him up to be able to focus on what God has called him to do. At the same time, allowing the people in his church to be ministered to by other members of the church. That's what the church is all about, okay? So, the third question, why did New Testament Christians have to meet in houses? I talked about that the other day with the church at Corinth. They didn't meet at temple, they met in wealthy people's homes, members' homes. Why not the temple? Well, the Jewish unbelievers, people who had not accepted Jesus, they didn't like the church. They didn't like this new Jesus movement. And they threatened the church people with violence and sometimes death. So these church people, they would still meet in the temple to learn about God and stuff and recite the scriptures. But their main Christian growth came from when they met in their churches, in people's houses. So they would probably have loved for their temples to be places where they can worship Jesus. But the religious leaders of the time just did not believe in Jesus and did not have any patience or any time for people that did. And they had to be very careful because persecution was starting now, and they could have been beaten, thrown in jail, or even killed. Okay? So Here's a question that was submitted. Someone asked me a question about eating pork. This is a really good question. There's some scriptures in the Old Testament that talk about certain foods you're not supposed to eat and certain foods are okay. This person said, does this mean we can't eat pork? Bacon and ham and all that. Is it bad? Is it good? In the Old Testament, here's the answer. In the Old Testament, God told Noah, after they got off of the ark, people started eating meat. God told Noah not to eat certain animals. Animals with split hooves who didn't chew the cud. You know what that is? It's when they, like for example, a cow will eat grass and swallow it and then bring it back up and swallow it, chew it and swallow it again. It's kind of gross. But ruminants, I think they call them, those kind of animals. Well, there are certain animals that don't do that. Generally, the animals that God was like, don't eat this, were animals like pigs and like vultures and certain wild rabbits, things like that. These animals were like living garbage disposals, okay? They would eat anything, living or dead. And people were likely to become ill by eating these things based on what the animals had eaten. And so God was like, listen, these certain things, just don't eat that. It's not good for you. So people were told, kind of stay away from that. They ate dead things. Some of these, like some pigs today, I know some people say pigs are very clean animals. Okay, if you want to believe that and you have a degree in animal husbandry and you've lived on farms and you want to try and tell me that pigs are the cleanest animals out there, you go ahead and try. But every pig I've ever seen, they're perfectly happy rolling around in dirt and slapping their own poo. And they don't look very clean to me. I'm sorry. Intelligent? Okay, maybe. Clean? Sorry, I'm not believing that. And if you want to argue with me, you're free to do that. But the Bible likens those kind of animals to animals that'll eat anything, and it's really gross. Certain shellfish, God also told his people not to eat because they feed on dead things. And they can actually make you very, very sick if you eat them, especially if you prepare them improperly. So anyway, that's in the Old Testament. Now, fast forward. So God told them no. So fast forward later in the New Testament. For example, God told Peter to eat these things. He gave him a vision one day and have all these like pigs and everything in this sheet that was lowered down. And God said, I want you to eat this. And Peter was like, I have never eaten anything on the unclean list in my whole life, God, and I'm not about to start. No, I'm not going to eat that. And so God tells him, you should not call animals that I have made clean unclean. Go ahead and eat it. It's okay. So remember also that Jesus told us that it wasn't necessarily what went into a man that defiled him, but what came out of a man defiles, meaning, it's not necessarily what you take into your body, but it's what comes out of you, as sin, bad things you say, bad behavior, things you do that makes you unclean. So God is now telling us in this time of grace that he's more concerned with our outward actions and how we, treat people and talk than, eating bacon. So keep eating that bacon. It's good stuff. I love it. Okay. Someone also, when they talked about the pork, they referenced Isaiah 66:17. And this verse is mainly discussing other things that people were doing, not just eating like pigs and mice and things like that. People were committing idolatry. They were going, behind things. They were acting godly in public, dressing right and worshiping God in public, but they were disobeying God in their private lives. Basically, God is calling them hypocrites here, and he is telling them that he will judge them for that. So God is telling us, again, it's not necessarily what you take in, but what comes out. that's more important, especially now in the New Testament time. Okay, last question. Are tattoos wrong? Are tattoos wrong? Okay, this is kind of a gray area in Scripture. Nowhere in Scripture does it say that tattoos are wrong. But, there's always a but, okay? The Bible also tells us to obey our parents, okay? If you're still living at home, if you're still living at home and you're a child, if your parents have told you absolutely not are you to ever get a tattoo while you're living under our roof, you need to obey your parents and abide by their rules. The Bible also tells us that outward adornment is less important than our inward self. People were making themselves up, and women were doing themselves up in their makeup and doing their hair and to get noticed, and they weren't worried about their godly lives, their heart on the inside. God asks us to question why and our motives, why we do things. Why do you want a tattoo? Is it to draw attention to yourself? Is it to look cool? Is it to look like somebody else? Is it to look like the world? Or is it for another reason? Are you honoring somebody or something like that? So you also have to remember that your body does not belong to you if you are a Christian. Your body does not belong to you. It belongs to the Lord. So this is a conversation that you need to have if you're an adult with God. And if you're married, you need to have this conversation with your spouse, because when you get married, your body also belongs to your spouse, not just you. If you are not an adult, this is something that you need to discuss with your parents and get their approval before you do these things. The Bible also tells Christians to live separate from the world. We are not to look like the world. We are to live in the world, doing God's work while we're here, but we are not to be of the world. So if your goal is to get this tattoo to make you fit in with the world, the Bible tells us that that is a wrong motive, and you should not. In the Old Testament, lastly, in the Old Testament, Leviticus talks about tattoos. And tattoos were often, very often, a pagan or ungodly practice with foreigners. They would tattoo themselves in honor of their false gods, of an idol. They would do it for superstitious reasons. They would do it because other people, to honor other people, maybe their dead relatives or something. Again, ask yourself why. Why are you going to do this to your body? Is it to honor God, or is it to honor yourself? And that's the answer. When you find that answer, you'll have your answer as if you should have a tattoo or not. It's none of my business what you do with your body. And as long as my daughter's living under my roof, she better not get a tattoo. Okay? Just saying. If you have any other questions, you can always text me or ask me here on Instagram. I will always be willing to at least try and answer your question. It was a very short day today. Thank you for tuning in. I love you all. And I hope you tune in Sunday for our Sunday school lesson. It's already, I think, up on YouTube if you check. And also, if you can come to our drive-in service, it's our last drive-in service, simple drive-in service. The Sunday after, we will have both drive-in and inside if you want to come in. So tune in and watch Sunday school and come and see us for church on Sunday. I love you all, and I hope you all have a wonderful